Greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. We're here I'm going to discuss Rebekah's interaction with Leo on the Big Bang. I only asked her for 10 minutes. If she wants to stay longer, that's fine. I had some things to reflect on, and I'd like to salute Leo for his interest in this. I have I have nothing personal with him. He's a little he can be a little hyper at times, but I don't take that as aggressiveness or whatever. It's just kind of his natural mode. And so I'd like to open with a prayer because I have some personal things. My phone is going off crazy. People know some things that are going on in my life that, sometimes I'll get called to a conference at the last minute and I just don't want to deal with it. And I already scheduled this show, and I'm giving this show and Rebekah priority. So let's just open in prayer, just to calm my nerves down and to just calm everyone else's. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time to talk and to ponder. I am so grateful that Christians like Rebekah are interested in science and the scientific method. Lord, the heavens declare your glory, and it's a privilege to study it. We thank you for Leo. We thank you that he was willing to spend time with Rebekah. And Lord, help this show be a blessing to our hearers, Lord. And guide our conversation. And thank you for all you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. So fill me in on how you felt, and then I'll give I took some notes, and I'll give my observations.
Well, it was a good discussion. But I'm disappointed to hear that my volume I changed my volume. I turned it up and I turned Leo down, but I guess it didn't have effect. So that's a bummer. But
Maybe
overall, I
toward
was
the
fine
end.
with the discussion. I
I
mean,
think it
what was
improved. I think it
Mhm.
did improve. So I don't want to
Okay.
make you feel too bad. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Yes.
But overall, I thought the discussion went well. I'll be honest, the thing that frustrated me was that I was looking at the comments in the side chat, and it seemed that everyone was saying, like, Rebekah doesn't know what she's talking about. She's not giving any evidence. Basically, it was all like completely dismissing everything I was saying. And I thought I was doing a good job of, kind of exposing some of the problems with the Big Bang. But, um, you know, anyway, I felt like it just didn't, it wasn't making the impact that I hoped.
Yeah, you felt it didn't connect. Um, see, my perspective is just a little different because I kind of get. I was around the graduate students and professors who are questioning the Big Bang, and so I get to hear how they criticize it a little bit. So the I feel bad because I said the Santa Claus thing was fine, but I wouldn't have pushed it too far. I would have just said, I, you know, the, the, that would be about the one thing, and I take some responsibility for egging you on in that. That's not your fault. Now looking in retrospect, I would have said, Rebekah, that's a good instinct, but don't use it in a discussion with someone like Leo. So that's on me, not on you. I should have. So, um, um, so there's going to be things where you're going to hear. It's going to be interesting because there's an upcoming show that with Rebekah and I, where she gets to hear my perspective on the problems with the Big Bang, and obviously I'll be giving a lot more friendlier reception to her questions, and I'll kind of give my perspective. I may recapitulate some of that here. So um, anyway, so you were kind of frustrated that. Can you say again what you were frustrated by? Um,
I was frustrated that it wasn't seeming to cause the skepticism that I hoped. Okay, because I feel that what Leo gave, which essentially is the only observation, even though he was saying, I've given you half a dozen things, he really hadn't. He gave us cosmic background and he gave us redshift, which we already knew because that is the observational evidence for the Big Bang. What did you think about the idea of general relativity being used to support the Big Bang? And how did you think I did in answering that?
Okay, because, and this is something where I could have dinged him on because I'd studied general relativity. General relativity gives a solution that allows expanding space. General relativity does not prove the Big Bang. You can have all sorts of descriptions of even non-expanding space in general relativity. I mean, so you could say, well, general relativity proves non-expanding space too. Look at all the equations you could look at all the metrics I could build that'll show it. I think that's the term. Look at all the solutions, the Einstein field equations that have. So Leo made a little circular reasoning mistake, but you have to have really keen ears, and he talks fast enough that you may not pick it up. The only reason I pick it up is I kind of know the script, and I'm quick enough to. I'm normally kind of slow in picking it up unless I've heard that play. I've seen that play before, and so that's a subtle mistake. General relativity does not prove the Big Bang. So let me give an illustration. Newton's second law of motion: force equals mass times acceleration. So, I mean, like, you kind of feel it in a car. If the car is real heavy, you need more force to make it accelerate. Or if it's accelerating real fast and it's a heavy car, you know you have a powerful engine, something like that. Now, so F equals mass times acceleration. What if you came up with an imaginary entity called negative mass? So you either have zero to positive, you either have zero to positive, you never have negative mass, but you could throw that in Newton's second law equation and say, look at all the things that I've made. Look at all the predictions and things. And it's like, well, there's no proof you have negative mass. In fact, in general relativity, the professor assigned us to solve this particular, he said, figure out the geodesic for this particular metric. And we all worked on it for a whole week. And at the end, he said, okay, you know what it was? I think I had it. He said, you're describing this. He said, you know what? That's a wormhole. But you need negative mass to make it work. We don't have evidence of negative mass, but the equations say it will work if there is. So I would have shut Leo down real fast when he was saying you don't understand general relativity. I would have said, I don't completely understand it, but I have taken a class in it in graduate school, and I studied in cosmology. So I would have stopped him real fast there. And the thing is, in a discussion, when you can stop your opponent and show that he made a mistake, that counts for a lot. So that's just a finesse point.
Well, I did tell him general relativity does not support, it's not evidence for the Big Bang. You can have general relativity without the Big Bang being true.
And I missed that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I would have gone further to cite, I said, there are many, I probably would have just added, there are many solutions to Einstein's field equations, and some of them are purely imaginary, and we wouldn't expect them. No one would take it seriously. It doesn't make it real just because you can make a mathematical solution to an equation.
Right.
That's very typical in physics. I would have just been able to add a little more. So good on you and I'm sorry, my apologies to you that I missed that.
That's okay. How did you think I did overall?
I think that I'd have scored you at about 30% to the ideal.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
I would have done things in a different order. So for example, okay, I'm a harsh guy. All right. But you're still the best. All right. So the colliding, okay, I'll give you
I said 10 minutes. We're at 9 minutes, 48 seconds.
Okay, slap.
I'm just joking.
Okay. No, but I hope you will, look, let's just say I'm having this show because we can kind of sit back a little bit and just kind of in a more relaxed atmosphere and just say, how could we have phrased this differently? So when you said the colliding galaxy problem, yeah, Schnoil said Sal was busy writing. He didn't pay attention. There, you have one of your defenders there.
Thank you.
There you go, Rebecca. There, I got my demerits too. Okay. So
yeah, were you actually paying attention, Sal?
I paid attention when you would respond. I could half anticipate what Leo was saying. So when you said colliding galaxies, okay, I took some notes. Sometimes I'm not a very good note taker, meaning I can't listen and take notes. What'll happen is I'll listen, I'll take a note, and while I'm writing down the note, I probably can't listen at the same time. Some people are able to do that. I can't. So, but some things were important enough, and I have it in my list. You said the Big Bang and colliding galaxies. I would have said, Leo, let me finish. You need the elliptical galaxies. Elliptical galaxies were found very early, according to James Webb. And those have to develop by many collisions of pre-existing galaxies. This is problematic. And what's happening now is we're going to, now we have a free parameter. It's like, or a promissory note or an epicycle. Oh, we have to revise our understanding of galaxies. But what's not on the table is the Big Bang is wrong. So I would have just I wish you had just articulated a little longer that this is the elliptical galaxy problem that, and you even were the one that said, you told me outside of YouTube that, the elliptical galaxies take about 7 billion years. So what are they doing there at, like, say, a few 100 million when you need pre-existing galaxies? Not only do you need pre-existing galaxies, they have to collide with each other. So if you had added like maybe two minutes of elaboration, you would have got him, and you're letting him keep interrupting you, and he was kind of quick. He said, "No, we have evidence galaxies collide," and just like, okay, he basically was able to twist. He was quite successful in saying, I have proof galaxies collide, and he kind of misconstrued. I knew your intended meaning, but he took it to mean something else and refuted that. So it could have been clarified, and I think he wasn't deliberately strawmanning you, but that was one point. It's like, that was actually a really good point when you said 7 billion years, and you'll just say, Leo, okay, the problem is, galaxies, you just don't expect galaxies to form that quickly. And this is still problematic. And the problem is we were counting on something, being there to give affirmation. You can't keep affirming things by appealing to promissory notes. So that was one thing I did pick up on. He also made a mistake. He said, I don't know about the Tolman test. I looked at Wikipedia just to make sure. Tolman test is a confirmation or a refutation of the Big Bang, specifically the expanding universe. So if we had a slower time at this, and you could say, hey, Leo, let me just look at this on Wikipedia just to verify if that's correct. I had to just double check, and you would have been able to ding him on that. It's like, Leo, this is a problem. And you cited Disney, where he said, I would have quoted the Disney article where he said, we were working on the Hubble Space Telescope, and look, they're saying, forget about the seeing stars that far away, because you're not going to see them, and that's the Tolman surface brightness. And he was too quick to dismiss everything, and I wouldn't have let him get away with it, So, and he, it's like Disney's, the Tolman surface brightness test is something that could have affirmed the Big Bang. At the very best, it's neutral. At worst, it's been falsified. Um, so, uh,
Well, it seems like you're picking out the end points. But look, you're talking about things that happened 2 hours in, which I was tired by that point and I didn't
yeah,
care anymore about articulating well. So, what about at the beginning?
that's my fault because I egged you on for the Santa Claus thing. I still think that's pretty good for for the opening thing. I would have avoided the cosmic. I wouldn't say I would have avoided the cosmic microwave background radiation, but I would have pointed out to Leo, there's no proof that it's everywhere. You're only assuming that because that's, you know, it's where you look, but it doesn't mean that it's everywhere. It could be local. And he'll say, what's the alternative explanation? I said, well, that's not my problem. You are making an assumption here to prove the Big Bang, and that's illegitimate. You can't assume the thing you're trying to prove. You can't make assumptions to prove something. And I would have just hammered him on the redshift. I said, that's why I had the picture of the police radar gun. If you have a redshift due to motion, do we invoke expanding space if I get the speeding ticket? I would have kept hammering him on that. Does that, just because you have a redshift, does that, and let's assume that it's because the galaxy's moving away from us. Does that mean space is expanding?
No.
I would have totally hammered him on that. And so the way we can tell if space is expanding is the Tolman surface brightness test. That's why that Mighty Mouse galaxy was so devastating. It's like, we have to have then a galaxy that has really unusual characteristics, that it's so teeny tiny and is as bright as the Milky Way galaxy. And it's like, how did that happen? Or maybe a more reasonable explanation is it's the size of the Milky Way galaxy. And the reason we can see it is there is no expanding space. And by the way, that it occurred to me, we can't even measure for objects that far, we can't actually measure the diameter of the galaxy. We have to sort of guess at it. And so if you assume the Big Bang, you get one size. And if you assume a static universe, you get another. That's why in your diagram, you had two different sizes, one of 90, something like 90 parsecs, the other 6,000. And so this is where I was getting, all of this is kind of model dependent, isn't it? You could prove, these are free parameters. You could prove whatever you want. If it's like, we're clearly seeing it, therefore the Big Bang's true. But it's like, well, you're saying that you can just adjust the size of the galaxy to keep giving you enough surface brightness or surface volume brightness. So I would have hammered him on that. And then I would have followed through on the alternative mechanisms. He was too dismissive because there's experimental evidence. I was hoping you'd cite the article from 1974 and 2021.
Yeah, I didn't get there. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get there, and I should have cited that. That was my bad, because I did intend to speak more about the redshift and the Pioneer 6 and also the other one about the time dilation and stuff. But I mean, I don't know.
He's very quick. You see, this is the problem in very fast interactions like this versus scholarly. You can be thrown off balance where he's saying things so fast and you're just trying to react. So sometimes in a discussion, all I'll do is I'll just do a data dump. It's pre-scripted. I'm just going to ignore whatever he says. I know that may seem kind of rude, but it's like I could either ignore it or I could take note, but I'm not going to respond. I'm going to go and just lay what I know, and then I'll let him deal with it. He'll just say, and his standard move is, he's just quote mining. He's making this up. And that's where it's like, okay, how do you refute that when he would just kind of off the cuff say that? And I knew he was off the cuff because he didn't characterize the Tolman surface brightness test accurately. He
Mhm.
didn't know that was a test of expanding space. That's pretty basic. He, I mean, this is a potential falsification, and it's not succeeding. And I would, if I had something to offer where he said, "You're going to throw out the whole model because it's wrong," I would have used a quote, since he's a big Darwin fan. Darwin's bulldog says, "The tragedy of science, the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by a single ugly fact. A single ugly fact can destroy a beautiful hypothesis." And we were talking about geocentrism. Geocentrism, there are any number of single ugly facts that could destroy the whole model. If your model can't be destroyed by that, that means it has all these free parameters. That means it's not really falsifiable. You can just keep adjusting it until you can, to kind of perpetuate it. And now it's making sense now why Michael Disney's saying you have all these free parameters. It's like if you get kind of a falsification on one parameter, you'll just adjust the number here and adjust another number there, maybe throw another promissory note or epicycles. So good on you for citing geocentrism and epicycles. That was good. That was really good. So when he was saying, "Are you going to throw out the whole model?" I would have said, "Absolutely, you should. Absolutely. One fact against expanding space is enough to sink it. And the Tolman surface brightness test is enough." He has to prove that a redshift implies expanding space. And I wish I could use that when I got the speeding ticket for my from the state trooper. It's like, "Officer, my car really wasn't going that fast. There was space expanding in between us. That can account for the red shift." It's like, okay, so I wouldn't use
And
that. Go on, go ahead.
well, no, I just wanted to ask a question real quick. So, is the reason we need space to be expanding in the Big Bang model more for like the purpose of not letting the Earth be the center of the universe? Because like if the redshift is not expanding space, then that means everything seems to be going away from us, which would be really weird.
Well, okay, so you have two alternatives. If you have static space and you have the galaxies moving away, okay, I'm not saying this is what I believe, but
Okay.
if you have static space and you see the galaxies moving away, that's like, uh, did something make that and then just kind of give it initial speed? You can see the problem. If you have galaxies moving, you have to account for what's making it move. Now, so the thing we don't want is where it suddenly got all of this velocity or quote unquote momentum or however you want to call it. First, you have to solve how it got created and then why it's moving away from you. So expanding space tries to explain why it's moving away from you. And it tries to, but then it leads to all these conundrums of where did the galaxies come from and how did it evolve? And
Right, but I'm just asking about the alternative, Sal. Like, let's just suppose space is not expanding and that the redshift means that things are moving away from us. What is their reason for wanting space to be expanding rather than just everything moving away from us? Is it because it looks too weird that we would be like that much of a focus? Okay, so
yes,
really
yes,
there's not a so expansion is just to explain a weird circumstance.
they're trying to explain it. Yes, it solves expansion. Also solves. It, that's a really good question. But there are. That's a really good question, Rebecca. Because let's just postulate the galaxies are moving through static space. Where did it get all that velocity? And where did it start? And it's kind of nice to have a theory that claims to explain everything and you think you figured it out and makes you feel good. That's my best explanation. Because if we had that model, I would right away say, "Oh, that's kind of incredible that matter was just kind of spewed out and moving outside." I mean, there's, you know, the other thing, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't know why they would have to necessarily invoke expanding space. That was never explained in my cosmology book. What, you know, why did we exclude the other? Oh, wait, there is the steady state model, and the varieties of the steady state model where matter is continuously being created. And I would presume then stuff could be spewed out, but steady state's usually static. But I've never heard of a model where someone proposed, I guess maybe just never caught on.
Well, I mean,
but
yeah, that's something to look into, because
right.
expanding space, that is very weird.
And the problems
because you can redshift actually doesn't give you expanding space, right? Redshift tells you something's moving away. So why wouldn't we just assume that things are moving away? Why do we need to add in this expanding space? And I'm guessing, but I don't know. But I'm guessing because it would look too weird, because we would be, if everything is moving away from us, then, and specifically us, then we're the special place. But
and the fingers of God are pointing at us.
So we need it to be expanding so that everywhere can feel that everything is moving away.
And I'm working on something with special relativity that kind of questions this whole thing that you'll see redshift. Everyone will see the same amount of redshift. It looks, as I'm looking at this, when I showed all of these equations from electrodynamics and I was proving special relativity, I was looking at this. I said, no, here, this one, the Copernican principle fails. There is a special reference frame, and that's something I'm working on. And that's heretical, but so yes, if everything's moving away from us, there's you hit the nail on the head, Rebekah. It would put us in a special place, and that feels uncomfortable because that's so close to a miracle, just like the axis of evil aligning with the solar system plane. That was good on your part. I'm glad. I was saying, honestly, Rebekah, I was thinking, oh, please, Lord. I hope Rebekah says axis of evil. And you did. Bravo.
Finally, I'm getting a point from you, Sal. I'm finally getting a point. I thought I did pretty well. I mean, it was frustrating to me because, I mean, the insistence of Leo about the evidence that he was supplying, but I felt like he was mostly just repeatedly insisting. And so that was the strength of his argument, was the repeated insistence. And right.
If it makes you feel better, I rarely score myself above 60%.
Well, you only gave me 30.
I'm sorry. Because I wanted the 2.2 gigahertz experiment. I'm just like, you'd kill him with that. You would have absolutely obliterated him with that 2.2. There's a reason. Okay. There's a reason. I said you that.
There's a reason I dropped off and I didn't do that one. Okay. And the reason first of all, we got kind of off the topic of the redshift. He was way more focused on cosmic background radiation, right? So he wasn't as much focused on the redshift. And every time we started to get to the redshift, we would get off on another thing. But the thing about it is that I kind of, toward the end of the conversation, I did want to bring it back to that. But then I thought, you know what, at this point, I don't even know if it's worth it, because, if I say all this, he's just going to say, oh, no, it's not that. Do you see what I'm saying? The problem the way the conversation went.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I would have been more forceful, because I would have said, Leo, this is a physical experiment. You can't run away from an experiment. There's a data. There was a real redshift. We know the source frequency. It changed when it went through a plasma. This is very problematic for your model, because we have actual proof rather than circularly reasoned stuff, which is what he's using. Just like you're saying there's evidence of expanding space, and it's already failing the Tolman test, and he's still believing it and saying we can't throw out the model because you have all these cosmologists, by the way, really good on calling him out on argumentum ad populum, where he's appealing to the consensus. Good on you. So because that I think personally that we have multiple lines of physical experiments that show redshift can happen without one motion, and even worse, without expanding space. I said, these are the really ugly facts you have to deal with. And plus there's lots of plasma in space. You can't just dismiss this, Leo. There are going to be more experiments, and already the Big Bang is failing on those. So I know you would have gotten around to it if you had, if you're just kind of articulating it like in a show, but I would have just said the order of things is, first, redshift does not imply expanding space. Even Andrew Cumming said, yeah, no one's arguing that. And it's like, well, yeah, the problem is, Andrew, you can't prove that it implies expanding space. You need something else, and it's failing. You don't even have any proof space is expanding. Not to mention it kind of violates conservation of energy. You have to modify conservation of energy, because if I were with Leo, I'd say, okay, so space is expanding. So what's going to happen what's going to happen to the orbits of the electron if space expands between the proton and the electron? You've created potential energy there. Where does it go? Have you really thought about that? And what kind of experiments would you run that would unequivocally show you that space is expanding? How about we took 2 points, we put two objects out there in space, and hypothetically they're motionless, and you come back with a yardstick years later and you see, oh wow, space got inserted in between it. That would be a convincing experiment. And I would have hammered him on that. And I said, the only thing you have is circular reasoning. You don't have physical experiments. But we do have physical experiments where we have the appearance of Doppler redshifts just going through inhomogeneous plasmas or whatever. And I said, take that, single ugly fact overturns. And then for the dark matter, I would have said, Leo, we've made detectors. We've made detectors to look for dark matter particles. They have unequivocally failed so far. This is problematic for a theory. You're saying it exists. You can't measure it. You can't verify it. All your detectors say it doesn't exist. It's either the fault of the detector, or the dark matter really doesn't exist. You need an alternate explanation. Stop appealing to consensus. Stop appealing to saying it unifies all these facts. I'm sorry. That's why I had to hold my temper.
I did mention that. I did mention the big machine that was built to try to detect the dark matter, and I have a link to it in the description if anybody goes to look at it.
Good on you.
And
I missed that.
I think you listened to like the last 15 minutes.
No, I listened. I listened to it.
You listened most.
Okay. You know what would help is if you kept repeating it. I wouldn't have missed it. And the thing would be is if I were engaging him, I would keep repeating it, and because I'll notice something if an opponent does not address your point, just keep repeating it and say, sir, there's an experiment here. I think this is problematic. And I would have said, I mentioned this. I would have kept repeating it. I wouldn't have let him off the hook easily, because anytime he says, look at all this evidence, I said, I just provided you these failed experiments and it's failed. You can't say you're just ignoring it and it's your privilege, but that's confirmation bias when you're ignoring these anomalies. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Maybe I'm being too harsh on you.
Yes, you are, Sal. Yes, you are being too harsh on me.
I
did a good job for a layman trying to defend but actually I do feel like the Big Bang Theory is so weak, incredibly, incredibly weak. Like with the evidence that I've looked at, it's so weak that I feel that I should be able to defeat Leo. But basically, so it was frustrating to me that nobody seemed to be grabbing onto the points. That's the only thing that's frustrated me. I thought Leo did as fine a job as you can do.
Absolutely.
for this theory, because I don't care. Let me talk to an astrophysicist. They're not going to do any better than Leo, I don't think, because the observational evidence for the theory is so weak. And so I don't know. But do you think I'm overstating our case?
I think the Big Bang is obviously on a very bad footing, and in the discussion, Leo got away with something, saying inflation has proven this. I'm just like, oh my goodness, Leo, that's circular reasoning. Inflation is not proved. It's not solved the flatness problem. You're concocting the inflation thing. Is the proof of inflation is that it fixes the problem. And I wanted to say, okay, so inflation did it, therefore it's true. I could say God did it, therefore it's true. That God solves the problem. It's like, Leo, you have inflation of the gaps, or you have these promissory notes of the gaps. That's not science. It's a faith.
Yeah.
It's a faith statement, and I wouldn't have let him get away with that because.
But I didn't let him get away with it the first time, Sal. But let's ask the viewers that are watching right now. I can take it if you guys say I did a terrible job, and I let Leo get away with everything. Let me know in the chat, because I actually thought I did a pretty decent job, but Sal is just absolutely hating on me here, and it's really frustrating.
I'm not hating on you.
Yes, you are, Sal. Yes, you are.
Okay.
I don't think you would have done better, because you I know you have a lot more information than me, but I mean, I don't know that you would have done better in the moment, because
I don't think I would have.
Okay, but you said you gave me 30 and you usually give yourself 60.
That's because I'm talking biology. There's a reason I don't debate the Big Bang. There's a reason I don't debate young Earth creation. Unless I'm kind of like called into it at the last moment. I mean, a man's got to know his limitations. So I think you did fine.
All right.
Okay. So what I was saying is, relative to someone who actually knows what he's talking about, which isn't me. So, someone who had much more command of his citations than I do. This is why a discussion like this, that's why I don't like. Okay, so debate. Rebekah, I'm just saying that in a live discussion, it's so easy to just be knocked off the game plan, and I've done well. I scored myself at 60% for biology debates because it's really, evolutionary theory in abiogenesis is really easy to criticize. It's not so easy to criticize the Big Bang. So I'm not hating on you, Rebekah. But I haven't invited Leo to debate me on the Big Bang or anything. There's a reason why. Because
I think he did a good job. I don't have any complaints about
he
Leo.
Conducted himself well. Actually, I know this will sound mean, but this is
Then don't say it. Then don't say it. Then don't say it.
Not mean against you personally, but
no, against Leo. Don't say it.
No, not mean against Leo or anyone.
Okay.
This is mean against me.
Okay.
Okay. This will say that Sal's kind of a mean, opportunistic person. Okay. And this is not a rag on you or Leo, but I like to watch these debates so I can learn what not to say and what to say. And so I said, okay, Rebekah engaged Erica, and I learned, it's like, okay, that's not something I want to deal with. And then Rebekah engaged Leo, and I said, okay, I'll know how to deal with Leo if I had to debate him, because you kind of figured out, you kind of drew out of him what his hand is. And so I have found, there's only one person I've debated twice, that was Dr. Daniel Stern Cardinal. So the first one was kind of like, but I said, once I figured out what his game plan is, The second, it's the first debate got cut off because James was sick or something. And I said, oh, thank God I got saved by the bell. Now I know what his game plan is. 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, we debated and continued the debate. And I got him that time because I knew. So the main thing that I did was I let you go ahead and proceed. And I learned from it. So I'm gonna have, it's like, okay, this is how I would script this out, because now I know when Leo's gonna dismiss something, and I know how he's gonna say, oh, he just quote mined this, and I'm just like, no, Leo, if you ever say that again, I'm gonna have my Wikipedia article handy. I'm gonna say, no, that's not a quote mine. The Tolman test is real, sir, and the Big Bang is not past it. It looks like it's failing. And I would have memorized all my citations. And and that's what I would have done. So the main thing was I was opportunistic. So I'm harsh. I'm
no, that's fine. That's fine, Sal.
okay.
Fine.
So now that when I lavish praise on you, I'm sincere in believing that I feel that way.
Yes.
So if I'm being kind of overly harsh one time, just take it to mean that when I say nice things about you, I must really mean it. So
yes, but you're right. The thing about, I wish I would have expounded on the elliptical galaxies, the problem of finding the elliptical galaxies that far out, because you're right. I looked it up. I'm the one who looked up that it takes 7 to 10 billion years for those to form, supposedly. But then so what if they're only 330 million? If they're at a distance, that we know is 330 million years after the Big Bang, then when did they have time to form? That means they're older than the Big Bang. However, I think if I would have said all that, Sal, he would do exactly what he did every time I brought up something about the galaxies, which was say, well, we don't know everything about galaxy formation, and that's why that's not part of the Big Bang model. That's, something separate. And this is so annoying. This annoys me about evolution too, because they didn't used to really separate abiogenesis from evolution. I've been alive long enough to know that they didn't used to do that so much. But why did they start doing that? Well, because abiogenesis is incredibly inconvenient for evolutionary theory. So let's just put that problem aside. We'll separate it out. But I mean, you can't separate out galaxy formation from this theory. If within the theory you can't form galaxies, then guess what? Your theory's wrong.
Oh my goodness. So, if you had said that, if you can't form galaxies with your theory's probably wrong. Good on you. And of course, Leo will say, oh, well, we don't know if the galaxies, we still don't understand. It's like, that another promissory note, so I like the way you framed that. See, this is also the value of going back and reviewing it. I'll let you kind of just say, if I had the chance to rephrase my argument, this is what I would have said. And the other thing was the pace of the whole thing was so fast. He was, and a lot of times he would just interrupt you in between. He'd apologize because he knew it was a little bit, he said, he apologized a few times, but it was getting a little annoying. Even people that I think were on his side didn't like him interrupting you so quickly. So
I interrupted him too. I interrupted him sometimes too. So
yeah. So sometimes to prevent that, that's why I don't like free discussions too much, because you can get too much of that, and it's a little harder to say, okay, may I speak for a minute, and then you have another set of constraints if you're going to speak for a minute or 90 seconds. But then at least you don't get this. Like, for example, you're talking, he said, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, my screen is off, I'm still here. And just that kind of just destroyed the train of thought when you're speaking. So, I mean, that's not on you. So, I didn't know about Dr. Becky. So good point. Who is Dr. Becky?
Oh, yeah, she's a I guess astrophysicist at Oxford, and she has like a lot of subscribers. I don't remember how many, but I mean her videos get like 500,000 views. But she just talks about, space stuff. And so I was just watching some of her videos about the JWST discoveries and everything, and found some good stuff in there. Like I put up that chart that I put up showing that the problem with calculating the expansion rate of the universe, that came from her video where she showed that. And so yeah, what's interesting is that JWST is reconfirming what Hubble confirmed. So there's still a problem there.
So, this raises a basic question. What would falsify the Big Bang? And this goes back to Michael Disney. He said the whole edifice will fall on expanding space or the interpretation of the redshift.
Yes.
And I would have said, okay, so Leo, you agree there are observations that will destroy the theory in principle, that there's not going to be any fix if there's a falsification.
But he didn't agree to that. I asked him if there was anything, and he said no.
Okay.
Nothing.
I seem to recall. I've seemed to recall him. He said, "You can't just throw out the whole theory." I wanted to say, "Yes, you can, and you should."
Well, he said that nothing at this point would cause him to throw out the theory because it's basically an established fact.
You see, and that is anti-science. I mean, if he's going to pontificate about what constitutes a good scientific theory, it's falsification. And falsification of the redshift, the Tolman test, is a falsification. And you can't just keep appealing to a fix. So, the Big Bang, he's talking about the flatness of space. I just said, Leo, flatness of space was not predicted by the Big Bang. It's a fact. If you assume the Big Bang, you're saying space is what they call flat. That's something in general relativity. But you can't say that, the inflation thing predicted. It's like, no, the inflation thing was concocted to explain it. It doesn't mean inflation is true. This is concoct something of the gaps. We have to come up with the term. We use the word free parameter. They accuse us of God of the gaps, but inflation is like God of the gaps, but except it's inflation. And then like when he said the problem with galaxies, and like, okay, a promissory note of the gaps. There was a lot of that. So he did seem like nothing would I do recall now that he said nothing would overturn it. And I wanted to say that's really problematic, Leo, because I could cite things for well-accepted theories. If we found a falsification, we think our theory is wrong. So if electromagnetism suddenly start failing, it's like, okay, then there's something wrong with the theory, but we haven't seen it fail. Yet the thing with the redshift and the Tolman test, that would absolutely bring it down. And I would have said, okay, Leo, if the redshift is shown to have other mechanisms, would you find that problematic? At least problematic. And if it fails the Tolman surface brightness test, why would you keep believing it? That is a data point that should falsify it. So there are at least two major things that could falsify it, and I would have hammered on that. And you're like, well, look at all the weight of evidence. And I'd go back to Huxley's thing. You could have all that weight. You only need one data point to falsify it. Just like geocentrism, you were right about geocentrism making all these predictions. One data point, like say the Coriolis force, is enough to destroy it all. There are actually numerous data points, but you can only even one can destroy a theory that's made so many quote unquote successful predictions. and I would have hammered him a little bit more on, he has his philosophy of science a little bit off there.
Okay, well, we're almost at an hour, and I'm pretty tired. So,
Well, thank you, Rebekah. You availed
yeah,
yourself.
thank
Well,
you. Thank you for sending me so many papers and things to read.
oh, you're welcome. You worked very hard on this. I did. Okay, let me tell you something. I did learn something from Leo. He talked about the gravitational lensing as evidence of dark matter, and like I've heard that before, and I did Google around, and they said it's still kind of problematic, but right now it seems like a good evidence for dark matter. But it's not to the exclusion of other theories. I didn't say it's vindicating evidence. It's quasi-promising, pending refutation. And unfortunately, we have advocates in the young Earth creationist community that believe in dark matter, and I just didn't want to weigh in on that. That's one reason. Yeah, that's one reason I would have been reluctant to put that on the table before the experiments on redshift or the Tolman test. So this is kind of just the preference of what I put on the table first to add skepticism. I would have started off right there with I would have started off with expanding space, then the redshift, and then everything else.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, I think I may continue on.
Yeah, go for it. Please do.
I know you have to bail. So I was going to just talk about. I had some interesting things that I wanted to. I found some interesting things. That some are nerdy, some are not. There is a great website called Creation Evolution Headlines. Have you ever visited that one?
No.
Okay. He's a personal friend. His father wrote the book Evolution Possible, Evolution Impossible. And when I nearly left the Christian faith, I read that book. He was a biochemist. His father was a biochemist. He handed his belief in this down. And this is a really funny website. So I'm going to bring it up here. And he has a lot of stuff on dark matter. And so just look out Creation Evolution Headlines. And so dark matter. And he has some pretty inflammatory things to say, and it's funny. So like axions, another dark matter candidate not found. Will dark matter theorists see the light? And he worked, by the way, before I forget, he worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab before he got fired because of his pro-ID viewpoints.
Wow.
So some people didn't like it, but he worked at the NASA. It was a big lawsuit. Unfortunately, the judge said, well, maybe he really wasn't fired. It was just a reduction in force. But and so some cosmologists are seriously considering dark matter theory to be a blunder. So he does. He spends a lot of his time reading scientific journals. And then he'll find these quotes. Astrophysicist Indranil Banik of the University of St. Andrews. And he says, we can model the motion of the planets in the solar system quite accurately using Newton's laws of physics. But in the early 1970s, scientists noticed that this didn't work for disk galaxies, stars at their outer edges, far from the gravitational force of all the matter at their center. Were moving much faster than Newton's theory predicted. This made physicists propose that an invisible substance called dark matter was providing the extra gravitational pull, causing the stars to speed up, a theory that's become hugely popular. And he says, popularity is not necessarily necessary or sufficient criteria for scientific validity. Bannock bases his gentle suggestion to ditch dark matter on good old principles of science. A simpler theory that explains observations should be given preference. Okay. One of the most striking failures of the standard cosmological model relates to galaxy bars, rod-shaped, bright regions of stars that spiral galaxies often have in their central regions. The bars rotate over time. If galaxies were embedded in massive halos of dark matter, their bars would slow down. However, most, if not all, observed galaxies are fast. This falsifies the standard cosmological model with very high confidence. Another is that the original models that suggested galaxies have dark matter halos also made a big mistake. They assumed that the dark matter particles provided gravity to the matter around it, but were not affected by the gravitational pull of the normal matter. This simplified the calculations, but it doesn't reflect reality. When this was taken into account in subsequent simulations, it was clear that dark matter halos around galaxies do not reliably explain their properties. So I did not, by the way, I did not know of this before your discussion with Leo. I'm just pointing out there's this really nice resource when I'm trying to, when Leo keeps had thrown stuff out in the discussion, I said, he has a good point. Let me look that up. I could either Google or I could go to Creation Evolution Headlines by someone who worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. He was around people that studied this stuff, and he could just kind of wander down the office and say, hey, can you give me the best opposing viewpoint? So I thought that was interesting. And then he covers all the experiments, all.
Wait, you broke up a little bit. He had I heard the word experiments, but I didn't hear the rest of the sentence. For some reason, your mic is not working.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to let StreamYard catch up. It's just a little behind. I think it was overtaxed when I put that website on. So I'm not going to show it, but I would just say Creve info. So for the readers that thought Leo made a very good defense, and he did, of dark matter, it's different when you have time to kind of just surf scientific literature and see opposing opinions. And it's never as tidy as it seems. And so even when he makes good points, it's like, let's just be patient and let's look at this. So what I was hoping to do in the after show is just give people resources to find actually kind of humorous criticisms of the Big Bang, because there are plenty of Creation Evolution Headlines. And David Coppage is one of my friends. I've actually written biology articles on that website, which I think are some of the better things I've ever done, because Rebekah gets rightly so on my case for not being succinct. I actually wrote some succinct articles on this website. So I highly recommend that because, Lerner is not a creationist. You'll get to hear this from a creationist perspective, and also someone who was at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. So that was one thing. And I don't know, my feeling is that, I wanted to say there's a philosophical thing, and Rebekah and I are well aware of this. If the Big Bang is true, then it predicts that 5 billion years from now, the scientific method will fail. On a philosophical,
I mean, Sal, you care about this. I don't really think this is like, I don't think this is worthy of bringing up.
Okay. That's just me. That's what I was going to put it on the table. I would have just said a theory that predicts the scientific method will fail. That's also kind of problematic. To me anyway. So I did have kind of some things I was kind of preparing to show for the show. I'll give one technical thing and we'll just wrap this up. So there was
how about if I dip out while you do the technical stuff? Because I'm tired. I need to go.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have any?
I haven't heard about before. Is it something I haven't heard about?
I wrote to you about the wolf effect.
I don't remember. I mean, refresh my memory. What I need more than the wolf effect.
The wolf effect shows that light can imitate a Doppler shift as if it's moving when it's totally stationary. So you mentioned Wigner crystals, proud of you. I would have just shown the paper and cited both the Nature paper, and because what was happening, because you'd cited Lerner, people were saying, Sal, you should stop reading Lerner quackery, and just like, no, when you put the citation of the source material, it's just a little stronger. They can't say it's quackery, especially if it's an experiment. So you cited Wigner crystals, but there's another effect called Wolf that's confirmed in the laboratory. I didn't know that until, like, say, 1 a.m. last night, that I looked at that profile. I'm just like, oh my, the Wolf effect. You could have red shifts and nothing's moving, much less expanding. And by the way, it was cited by Cicero Roy, who signed that cosmology statement, and he was a professor at my university. So,
Wow.
maybe if I'll risk it. So I'm just going to let you sign off, and I'm going to I'm going to start to discuss the Wolf effect, but I'll give you the last word before you sign off. Thank you for doing this, Rebekah.
Well,
It was
thank
very
you for
stimulating.
staying up till 1 a.m. last night. I guess I probably did. I didn't have time to look at it this morning because I was at church. So, if you sent it at 1 a.m. last night, I didn't read it. But thank you, Sal, for all of your hard work on this, and I look forward to continuing this discussion and maybe to future debates and talks.
Yeah.
I kind of had fun with this. I think I want to do it again.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I think Leo is a great partner, a great discussion opponent, not enemy, an opponent, to have given you a good feel for, and also gave me a good feel of what we'll be up against. And there's the reasons I've never debated this. You're a lot bolder than I was, Rebekah. you're
Really? See, I feel like this is such an easy debate to have. I mean, maybe you didn't feel like I performed well, but I mean, I don't feel like Leo had anything. But I mean, like he said, the repeated insistence made it sound like he did. But the problems for the theory are, I mean, I just feel like this is much easier than trying to debate like evolution, which is quite broad. You know what I'm saying? Like evolution spans so many different like fields that it's like really, it's tough.
Well, thank you again for your hard work, and thank you for showing up 50 minutes longer than I asked you to.
My pleasure. Thank you. And I will go back and listen like later on to whatever you say in the rest of this. So thank you.
The Lord
Bye.
richly bless you.
And
God
thanks
bless you.
for watching. Hi, Jamie. Hi, BS. And Schnool, thanks. And Tape Deck, Fenton. Anyway, hope everybody has a happy new year. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so some of the papers that I wanted, I wish had been featured in this were, first of all, Michael Disney's paper. If I were in a debate, I would have just given Michael Disney's credentials, and he's respected. And Rebekah, to her credit, did quote Michael Disney when she was alluding to the Tolman surface brightness test. So let me, and Leo's was discrediting it because he was saying, oh, they wouldn't spend all that money to build a telescope, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just like, no. If one had read the citation, if the citation had been read on air, it would have clarified what was going on. So let me look up Disney's article. Disney. And I have it here. So let me bring up Okay. Let's see. Give me a moment to look this up. So Michael Disney. Okay, so let me share this here. Michael Disney's respected astronomer. So now I'm going to read what he had to say. Okay. All right. So this is from Michael Disney's cosmology folktale. He said, however, finding more direct evidence for the universal expansion must be of paramount importance. In the 1930s, Tolman proposed such a test, really good data for which is only now becoming available. Tolman calculated that the surface brightness, apparent brightness per unit area of receding galaxies, should fall off in a particularly dramatic way with redshift. So dramatically, in fact, that those of us building the first cameras for the Hubble Space Telescope in the 1980s were told by cosmologists not to worry about distant galaxies because we simply wouldn't see them. Imagine our surprise, therefore, when every deep field Hubble image turned out to have hundreds of apparently distant galaxies scattered all over the place, all over it. Contemporary cosmologists mutter about evolution, but the omens do not necessarily look good for the Tolman test at high redshift. If expansion were to fail, then so would the entire superstructure. And so Leo's fix to all this was to say, well, we don't know how galaxies evolve. What had to happen is you had to have these very, very, very compact galaxies at the start that are very tiny so that they could have a higher surface brightness. Now, we actually have a hard time measuring the diameter of galaxies that far. We know it's a dot out there. We know it's a certain redshift, but we actually guess at the diameter of the galaxies when it's just that far, a point of light. Now, obviously, for nearer galaxies, you can estimate the diameter. But for a big point of light out there, I mean, if you look up at the night sky and you just see these dots, it's like, well, how big is the source? And sometimes you would have to infer that based on either other assumptions or direct or some other measurement. So we're seeing these dots and we've determined that they're very red shifted. If we're seeing them, then they have to have a certain diameter if they're a galaxy. If we assume they're a galaxy, they have to have a certain diameter so we could see them, and therefore then it could generate enough surface brightness that we could see it. Otherwise, if it were very diffuse, if it were a lot wider diameter with the same number of stars, we wouldn't see it. So you need, just like kind of like a magnifying glass, if you can have very high intensity light by focusing all the light in one region. So if you have all the stars in one location in a small diameter, then you'll have enough energy that it could be seen by the James Webb Telescope. So why are we seeing it? Is it because, that the galaxy is really, really tiny, but it has, a bazillion stars in it? Or is it because it's a normal sized galaxy and that space isn't expanding? And that's what Michael Disney was pointing out. Rebekah quoted from that, she referenced that article verbally. I would have preferred that she read the entire article to not let Leo gave Leo an opportunity to strawman what she was saying. He started talking about the expense. Why build something so silly if you know you're not going to see it? And that ended up being a derailment. So that was an important point. And And Disney was right. This wasn't, and he was saying, oh, Michael Disney will just quote people and whatever and quote mine them. See, if you have the actual source, it'll refute that. This wasn't a quote mine. This is a known test. And it's so far the Big Bang is definitely not succeeding at this test. At best, it's not succeeding. At worst, it's already failed. Already failed. So right there, Leo, I would have dinged him on that and said, that's a straw man characterization, because this isn't something Disney made up. This is a legitimate test. It will distinguish between static space, non-expanding space. The last resort is to hypothesize galaxy evolution, where you start off with really teeny tiny galaxies that happen to have a bazillion stars in them, and then mysteriously they fly out. So I would have said, Leo, still no proof. I would have also dinged him on, okay, what happens when you have the electron, you have the proton, you add space in it, you're increasing the distance. That means you've created potential energy. What happens to that energy? And this will also apply to planets with gravitational attraction to them. You add space in, you've added, okay, how do you can say, okay, we'll modify conservation laws. Like, okay, but again, you haven't physically demonstrated, you haven't no direct experimental evidence that space is expanding. And I suggested, hypothetically, you have two objects in space that somehow miraculously you could maybe make them to have zero velocity relative to each other. And then you come back a year later and you put a yardstick and say, oh, okay, it's moved apart a little bit. That had to be space expanding. We have no such experiments. And the few experiments that are relevant to this, the Big Bang is not passed. It's absolutely not passed. Not passed is the best case scenario so far. It looks like it is failing. And that's why the James Webb Telescope is disconcerting. At what point do we start to say, the theory's overturned? That point could be when we start to find alternatives for the redshift. So I would say a model where we say we don't have a model is better than staying with a model that can't be right. So this is like staying with geocentrism even when you have all these epicycles throwing. It's like, no, you don't have to have a better model to say the model you have isn't good. If you're going to invoke promissory notes for future models of galaxy evolution, you could say, how about we could use promissory notes that maybe there's some model better than the Big Bang. So let's ditch the Big Bang. And he kept saying, this is how science works. I'm saying, no, buddy, that's not how science works. It's not how science works. So Leo availed himself very well. I think he was civil. This is just the data points that I'm having to disagree with. So let me bring up the Wolf effect. Oh, okay. Let me bring up the article that I really wanted Rebekah to Winter Crystal. So there was this observation, and you can count it as an experiment that spanned millions of miles, which is better because we know the source. We know a lot. We made the devices involved. So I'm saying this is a legitimate experiment because we made the objects that were under examination. They were man-made. We threw them out in space. We saw how they behaved. This is a lot better than just kind of just looking out there and making stuff up. And this was the article that she alluded to, and I was proud of her. I just wish she had shown it on the screen. It would have prevented Leo from strawmanning it. It would force him to have to deal with it. And this is what I would have presented. The redshift anomaly of 2,292 megahertz radio signal emitted by the Pioneer 6 space probe as multiple interactions with photoionized electrons in the solar corona. July 2021, Journal of High Energy Physics, Gravitation, and Cosmology. This proves plasmas can cause a redshift. We have more evidence that plasmas can cause a redshift than we do that expanding space exists. We have physical experiments with man-made devices proving this. We don't need to say, well, do we need an alternative origins model before we'll reject the Big Bang? The Big Bang it's already on its, on the back of its heels here. Even with this one experiment, okay, it's failing the Tolman surface brightness test. It's certainly not succeeding. It's failing it. We're finding other methods that can show that redshift can happen even without relative motion. So this is very problematic, and you can't just glibly dismiss this. I would have kept going experiment after experiment after experiment that shows that redshift does not exclusively mean motion. So I have the thumbnail of the police radar gun. Police radar gun. I had, let's see, I'd like to show the picture of it. So, oh yeah, here it is. So one way that a redshift of a electromagnetic wave can be created is if there is relative motion between the two objects. So I kept referring to the police radar gun. So if a car is traveling away from the radar beam, its frequency will be lowered, its wavelength lengthened. And so that's what we call a redshift, because it's, when something is, when white light becomes a little redder due to motion, it's a redshift if it's moving away. If the object that the light is bouncing off from, or the source of light, it'll be a little redder. So that's the meaning of the redshift, something like that. So definitely you can get a redshift if an object, the object with the light is moving away from you. In this case, it's the reflected radar beam. So it's not just light, but any electromagnetic radiation. It can be redshifted by relative motion. But obviously, if I got a speeding ticket, I'm not going to say expanding space was the cause of the redshift. And this is problematic for the Big Bang. You have to have something that proves that that space is expanding. And right now, all they have is either circular reasoning, or they should be trying to, at this stage of the theory, they should be saying, look at all the success the Tolman surface brightness test is going to, that's a prediction. The Big Bang will be vindicated by the Tolman surface brightness test. No, it has not been. At best, it's inconclusive. At worst, it's already falsified. Done. It's done. And then the next thing is, if we find evidence that the redshift can happen, and it doesn't have to deal with relative motion, this is going to be really devastating, particularly if it involves the sort of environments we have in space, namely free electron plasmas floating in space. We know that they exist. There's a density already kind of established for that. And it would also have a correlation with distance versus redshift. It would do that. It would also maybe account for things like polarization. There's a polarization dependence on redshift. The Big Bang doesn't predict that, but we found polarization dependence on redshift. So let's look at, let me look for the Wolf effect before I get in trouble. Professors at my school had cited this for the explanation of quasars. So let me look at the polarization. Okay. I'm going to show a diagram first. This is not from a reputable website, but it cites this data is citing reputable journals and researchers. So if we had a real Doppler shift, as in the police radar gun, it would have this profile. If we had a shift based on plasma, it would have this profile, under Wolf conditions. And this is very problematic, that you can get something that looks like it's moving and it's stationary. What happens is the intervening, the light or electromagnetic radiation traveling through this medium, and in this case, it's mostly empty space, but with plasma in between. And when they actually say inhomogeneous plasmas, under the right conditions, stationary object can look as if it's moving away. We have postulated this is why quasars have such big red shifts, and they also seem to be extremely powerful. It could be that they are actually very close to us and just happen to be giving us big red shifts. So if we could say red shifts can happen to quasars, and they're not really moving very fast at all, why can't we say that for any other object? And this is something that has been known, and it's just not, it's being dismissed, because then the Big Bang would be discredited if we started to adopt this as a possibility. And I'm just pointing out that expanding space has no proof except circular reasoning, and it's actually getting falsified by the Tolman test. It's getting possibly falsified by these experiments. So on the weight of things, are you going to believe the Big Bang, and yet there's this weight of evidence against it that's overturning it? The only thing that it supposedly unifies are all these circularly reasoned evidences, and that's not experimental evidence. This is like geocentrism, and then adding epicycles and say, look, the epicycles fit this perfectly, the model works. And it's just it's not really even a prediction. It's just like a free parameter. You're just gonna throw fixes up randomly. I got to credit Rebekah. She actually explained what a free parameter was really well. I wouldn't have been able to do that as well as she did. So there, I given a physical experiment with actual real world space plasmas. We are able to show that it is possible. This Wolf effect we've had it happen, I think, in some lab experiments. Also, it has to happen under certain conditions. But then there are other kinds of shifts that can happen. I'd like to say shift happens. Shift happens, and there are a number of causes for shift happening. It's not just velocity. We know velocity. I'm not going to contest that. We haven't proven that expanding space exists, so we can eliminate that as for now until they're actually able to prove that space expands. And I want to, given that this is from a peer-reviewed secular source, it just happened to be summarized in a not so, Rebekah says, oh, good. Yes, I was really impressed. I would not have been able to quote your free parameter thing from memory like you did. I was just like blown away. I'm like, I hope she's able to explain this. I was really impressed, Rebekah. That was good. I couldn't have done that. So that you had a point on me for that. So this Wolf effect, and unfortunately this is on a Plasma Universe website, and it has bad reputation, but look at the good citations. So they cited a professor at my school, and that's Cicero Roy. he is now in India, but he was at George Mason, and that's my undergrad alma mater. It has been pointed out by several authors that this mechanism may explain the anomalies observed in observed redshift measurements, especially in the case of quasar astronomy. It is generally believed that the medium around a quasar is highly anisotropic and plasma-like. And he says, and he also says, in the last few years, a dynamic multiple scattering theory has been developed to account for the shift as well as the broadening of spectral lines, even in the absence of any relative motion between the source and observer. This development followed the theoretical prediction made by Wolf, who discovered that under appropriate circumstances, it is possible to have frequency shifts of spectral lines which typically mimic all the characteristics of the frequency shifts obtained by Doppler mechanism. Since then, it has been verified by experiment that contrary to a commonly held belief, the spectrum of light is, in general, not invariant on propagation through a medium, especially for an isotropic, inhomogeneous medium with fluctuations in dielectric susceptibility, both temporal and spatial. And there were a couple things also about not just the failure of the Tolman surface brightness test. Andrew Cumming and I, on the side chat, were arguing, first of all, about quasars. And I cited a paper by Hawkins. He said, that's been dismissed. I kept pressing. I said, where does it, he cited an article in 2022. I said, where's the time dilation dependence on Z? I asked him like 5 or 6 times. He said, read the paper. I said, can you help me? So quid pro quo, he asked me to cite something inside. He said, show the paragraph. I said, yeah, here on the paper by Crawford. I did that. He didn't reciprocate. So that tells me I called his bluff. He's pretending to know something he doesn't. So the quasars do not have strong evidence of time dilation unless you're going to cherry pick data. And that's not really a proof. No strong evidence. Numerous researchers, not just Hawkins, others, and it's been quietly dismissed. And it's like, where have you proven that there's a time dilation dependence? If redshift, the idea, if I could explain this, time dilation, let me see if I have, there is a known phenomenon that when something moves faster, the clock, it ages slower. Now, some people says time flows differently. Not necessarily the best. I'd rather say the clock slows down. I can slow down a clock, just, I've had clocks not working so well and they've slowed down. It may be natural that when you go faster, that the clock slows down, but time is absolute. And this is in Einstein's twin paradox theory, but we have experimentally confirmed it. So if you had 2 twins, let's say they're brother and sister, they're fraternal twins, and the lady gets on her spaceship and travels 99.999999996% the speed of light, then one day to her will be like 1,000 years to her twin brother, and 1,000 years to her twin brother will be like one day to her. That is the theoretical prediction. Now, we haven't gotten anything quite that fast as far as spaceships. We have gotten things like in particle accelerators that fast, and their half-life has decayed accordingly, which is very good. And then also the clocks, we have cesium beam atomic clocks, very precise, and also in the GPS satellites, we have to account for the effect of velocity. So we know if something really is moving away from us at speeds proportional to the speed of light, its clocks should slow down. Now, I happen to have there is this calculator I could invoke. Distance calculator. So I can enter, so there's a cosmology calculator that by Ned Wright, and I'm going to use that one. So if I have a redshift of, say, 12, and there are some really highly redshifted galaxies, the light, let me see, does it say how fast it's moving? It doesn't give the speed. Oh, I wish it gave the speed. Does it give a percentage of the speed? Does it give a speed? No, don't do that to me. I need to know the speed. But in any case, where was I headed with this? If something's moving faster away from you, according to their theory, then it should age slower. So they had previously claimed, some researchers like Blondin and Andrew Cummings cited him, a 2008 paper. And then there were other papers that said, okay, we've confirmed that, we know how quickly a supernova should kind of finish its business. And so more redshifted supernovas, if the Big Bang is true, its clock should slow down. So we should see it kind of take longer to finish its business, kind of like gets really bright and then it dims down. And a researcher named Crawford surveyed all these supernovas, and he said, well, the only way you're able to come to that conclusion is you have inadvertently cherry-picked the data that confirms your predisposed conclusion. It wasn't nefarious on the part of the researchers, but it was a subtle mistake of circular reasoning. And then he showed that if you look at all the quasars, there's no evidence of systemic redshift. And that was an article that I would have posted and said, this is very problematic. Now, I confronted Andrew Cumming. He said, that's been discredited. Crawford's been discredited. So, okay, there's a 2017 paper. And I said, what paper discredited him? And he cited a 2008 paper. I said, how can a 2008 paper, how can you claim that discredits a 2017 paper? As in, like, you actually address what someone said in the future and said Crawford is wrong. That would be a proper refutation if you're going to claim that it refuted it. And saying he discredited Crawford. It's like, I don't think so, because Crawford published 2017 and Crawford referenced Blondin in 2008. So I dinged Andrew Cumming on that. And he's not, I'm not letting him get away with that. And I kept pressing him, also on another paper, and he wouldn't get back to me. Didn't want to fold. He said, I called your bluff. And so Crawford, let me see if I can get Crawford's paper. So there's one, Big Bang Tolman surface brightness test. It's failing the time dilation test. And it turns out that the ones that had supposedly vindicated the time dilation test ended up using circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is not a proof. So David Crawford, and he's a respected astronomer, and that would be, there are both supernova and gamma ray bursts. And so he published in an open journal on the problem of analysis of type 1a supernova. And he cites Blondin in 2008. And I'm like, dude, Andrew, if you're going to say that someone refuted a paper in the future, I said, that's just, I'm sorry. You're off my credibility list right away. This is a 2017 paper. And Andrew Cummings said, well, look at this 2008 paper. And here it is. there's this 2008 paper being referenced in this future. This is just not, this is, Crawford was aware of this. And as a responsible person, I'm seeing that he's read Blondin's work. And he criticized Blondin in this paragraph. So, you know, that's a demerit for Andrew Cumming there. So the problem is, let me try to show this. Okay, so this is Crawford. So this is the time dilation test. It's not unequivocally shown that it passed. It may have been falsified. And what's worse is prior publications that claimed that it was vindicated turned out to use circular reasoning. Okay, so if space is expanding, we're supposed to get, this line shows that there's time dilation. Now it calls it relative width, but it can also be correlated with time dilation. So the more that you get redshift, the more time dilation you would get in your supernova. So you would expect all these little dots, these dots are supernovas. These dots are supernovas. You'd expect to see the dots lining up. You know, you wouldn't see them kind of lining up like this, straight line. You would see them lining up on this line. And clearly it's been falsified that it's not dilating. And I think Michael Disney actually, let me see if, anti-cosmology. He cites Crawford's paper, I think. Oh, it was Hawkins that cited Crawford. So there's been a failure of time dilation. Big Bang has failed the redshift time dilation test for supernova. It has failed it for gamma ray bursts. I think the gamma ray bursts might even be more devastating. I'm not an astronomer, but okay. The Tolman test, it's at best, it's not passing. Give it a fail. The time dilation for quasars, fail. Supernova, likely fail. Gamma ray burst, likely fail. The tragedy of science is that a beautiful theory is the slaying of a beautiful theory by a single ugly fact. I've given 3 right there. This is not looking good for the Big Bang. Fourth, if we find alternative means of showing redshifts that are not due to relative motion, whatever you call it, okay, expanding space, whatever. But if they are, basically, if you can get a redshift to 2 objects that are stationary out in space, that may mean you have no relative motion, no expanding space. Theory is gone. We have now an alternative explanation for the redshift other than expanding space. We have 3 tests that have failed relative motion. That would be the quasars, the supernova, the gamma ray burst. We have had, so that immediately already a fail, and then a fail for the Tolman surface brightness, which is a specific test for expanding space. So what's my alternative model? I don't need one to show that someone's wrong. I don't need an alternative model to show that an existing model has failed tests. And if a model is not falsifiable, it's not a good scientific model. It is a faith statement. It is akin to philosophy and religion. And that's okay. I have faith in things. But why would you build on your faith in something when the model is, by its own, foundation, it looks like its tests have failed, or it's really not looking good, So that's what I have to say. I'm not convinced. In fact, after the James Webb Telescope came out, this started to look pretty bad. And oh my goodness, Rebekah's here. And I don't know how I can make this up to you, Rebekah. I was just so mean and harsh, and I did miss a few things you said, and I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it up to you. So what can I do to make it up to you? I'll be a slave researcher for you for one day. How about that? So you say, okay, Sal, can you look this up for me? You promised you'd make it up to me by spending a day doing research. So if I ask you a question, so if Rebekah asked me a question, I'll say, okay, I owe it to you because I was so mean to you today. Yes, she said, just keep driving. Yes, I need to stay in good graces with Rebekah. So it kind of just keep groveling, Sal. Okay, so now a little bit about, now I remember what I really wanted to say. And this is from my cosmology book, and I was praying about this. I want to show you something from my, okay, you know, I got to credit Rebekah, you know, she's such a fast learner, okay? She absorbs the main points just like that. You know, I'm kind of more cautious and reserved. And I remember telling her specifically, I said, you articulated, you know, she was on her channel when she's speaking in Demo. She went on, and I duplicated it on this channel. It was so good. I duplicated it on this channel. I said the 20 minutes, best minutes, you know, Rebekah at her finest, because she articulated something that she learned very quickly. And I was like, I studied this stuff. I couldn't have said it as good as she did. It was beautiful. And I was like, yeah, you know, when she's given the freedom to just kind of just have that stream of consciousness and not be interrupted, she's very lucid and articulate. In a discussion with Leo, who interrupts, I don't think it's intentional, but he, you know, it's just the way he is. He kind of breaks the train of thought. But I was really impressed. Now, when you know, if I were up against Leo, I have a little more background because I did take classes in this. And there's this interesting thing. So the second to last class I had at Johns Hopkins was cosmology. It went into a lot of the things Leo was talking about. And there's this paragraph in page 17. It says here, during the 1950s and 1960s, the Big Bang and steady state models battled for supremacy. Critics of the steady state model pointed out that the continuous creation of matter violates mass energy conservation. Supporters of the steady state model pointed out that the continuous creation of matter is no more absurd than the instantaneous creation of the entire universe in a single Big Bang billions of years ago. Now, Rebekah used her Santa Claus analogy, and I feel kind of responsible for egging her on to use it. But this paragraph from my cosmology book basically says kind of what she's saying. It says here, supporters of the steady state model pointed out that the continuous creation of matter is no more absurd than the instantaneous creation of the entire universe in a single Big Bang billions of years ago. And what I realized is, for this expansion to happen, something outside of the observable universe is likely has to, you know, you could say, quote unquote, cause it. So when we have solutions to the Einstein field equation, for example, you'll have, like, say, a gravitational field. And then in relativity class, they'd say, okay, here are the characteristics of the gravitational field. This is its strength and so forth. This is the diameter. Now you figure out the geodesics, and then now you build the metric around it. You describe the solution. So there's some famous solutions in my relativity book that were already worked out. They're nicely symmetric. They're in this book. And some of them include the expanding space, Friedman, Lamarck, Robertson-Walker metric. That's a solution to the Einstein field equation. Where was I headed? Yes. So you have you have external characteristics, something external to this, to the to where the field is, where that field is solved. You have something that is causing that field to have certain characteristics. I think that there's something that had to be outside of the Big Bang, if you're assuming that, to make it, to cause it to happen. Now, I have a book from 30 years ago, Halliday and Resnick, that talked about there is a time before the Big Bang. I mean, after the Big Bang, what they call Planck time, for which we cannot say the laws of physics as we experience them now are valid at all. There's a point you cannot extrapolate and say these laws of physics are eternal. If you assume the Big Bang, you're assuming things even like Planck's constant and other things did not take on the form they have in our laboratory measurements now. If you can modify the characteristics of matter that way, and you can quote unquote break the observed or the present day laws of physics at will, then anything's possible. You don't need to assume that things came from, the entire observable universe came from a point that could fit on a pinhead. Why don't you just assume that matter was created in place? Wouldn't that work just as well? Because you're already assuming something outside of the observable universe. There's an implicit assumption something outside the observable universe is the explanation for all the observable universe we have. Now, we have no idea of what it was. You could say, well, whatever that was, whatever the source was, it did it in a, started it in a pin. Well, why can't you just say ready-made universe? Well, the stars and planets, matter, atoms, subatomic particles were all there at once. Why is that problematic? If you're going to admit a breakdown in the laws of physics in all of your models, the laws of physics as we know them today, if you're going to postulate that they were different under different conditions, like say different time or whatever, then you could just as well assume that the universe was ready-made. Why is that? Why would that be problematic, except it raises philosophical questions? And that was the point I was wanting to make. You see, even in my cosmology book, it's talking about the absurdity. Both models, three models of the origin of the universe. We could roughly say steady state, Big Bang, a variety of creationist models. Each of them invoke the instantaneous creation of matter for reasons that we don't know. We can't say that the Big Bang actually avoids that problem. And if you're going to invoke instantaneous arrival of matter for reasons we don't know, you could just say ready-made universe. They may complain about that, but how's that different than inflation of the gaps? You're fixing all these problems with the Big Bang with just a hypothetical entity you can't prove, you can't verify, you can't measure, except to say, well, the theory kind of meets all the requirements, but we don't know that it's real. I could say, well, then God of the gaps is just as fine then. And Christians don't like me using the God of the gaps argument, but I actually think that's a pretty good argument. I mean, if you're looking at the universe, whatever the source of it was pretty powerful. We can tell by the fine tuning it was pretty smart. Figured out how to make matter, and then so I'd say it's powerful and very intelligent. Now, is this me as a creationist saying this? Fred Hoyle, who is an atheist, you could say that he's something of a pantheist because he didn't like the idea of a personal God, but he couldn't escape the fact that it looked like an intellect had built the universe. So he's an atheist. I have his book, The Mathematics of Evolution. Great cosmologist, the same physicist who coined the word Big Bang, by the way. So from the Mind Matters AI website, let me see, I'm bringing this up. Okay, so this is what Hoyle said, and he's not a creationist. He said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. I'm going to read that again. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about. So one would ask, how can he not be a theist? And he did hypothesize, he wrote the book Intelligent Universe, which tells me he sort of thinks, well, maybe the universe is intelligent. It's not a personal God, but somehow it's intelligent, because obviously that's his super intellect. It's kind of a pantheistic super intellect, where the universe is kind of God itself. Whereas the Christian conception of God is outside the universe. But I'm just trying to explain how he resolved it. I find that unsatisfying, but I do agree with him. Yeah, it looks like a super intellect created the world. So do I think it's through the Big Bang? I'd say no. I think it's failed 3 tests for time dilation on redshifts, and it's failed another one for expansion of space. It's a done deal at that point. Until they can actually come up with an experiment that proves expanding of space, I would say this is a problematic theory. And until you can show that, you can actually show that there is a time dilation, which they're not able to, even though there have been papers that claim to have done so, and they've been discredited successfully by Crawford and etc., and others, by the way. I think the Big Bang has failed. Has failed. It's certainly not up to snuff compared to operational theories. So historical theories are problematic. Operational theories take precedence. So an operational theory is a theory that you can test and confirm with everyday real experiments, such as theories like electromagnetic theory, celestial mechanics, quantum mechanics as it deals, like, say, with chemistry, geometric optics, classical mechanics within its domain, statistical thermodynamics, statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. What's another one? There are 5 pillars. I used to know these. Classical mechanics, Hamiltonian mechanics, which includes Newtonian, electromagnetic theory, electrodynamics, statistical mechanics and thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, and relativity. Those 5. Those are very verifiable. Those are operational theories. They can be falsified, and to some extent, like with classical mechanics, it's like it fails outside of certain domains, and that's known. And so, and we're now having physicists saying general relativity can't be quite right. So within its domain, it's okay, but there are situations where it can't be quite right because quantum mechanics wants an absolute clock, an absolute time. So the Big Bang is not of that caliber. It is a historical theory, and it's having to invoke maybe a lot of new physics like inflation fields. And we don't have physical experiments for expanding space. Can you tell me any engineer that when he's building a device has to account for expanding space? It's just not there. Or does he have to account for dark matter in his construction of buildings? No, it's not there. So, it's even though I think the Big Bang is false, but let's say that even has a better chance than I'm giving it. It's low quality science. It's not at the level of accepted operational theories. So, I'm just saying, as far as I'm seeing it, this thing is kind of a secular religion. Why can't we just accept God of the gaps? If you're going to use inflation and promissory notes and free parameters of the gaps, why don't you accept God of the gaps? and that's a question each person has to resolve in their heart. At what point am I going to abandon, like, say, abiogenesis or evolutionary theory in favor of creation? Some people say there'll be no point. It's like, okay, that's what you believe. I'm not going to live your life for you. That's just not for me. And I see all this evidence against the Big Bang, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I think it's easier to believe God did it, because you guys are doing free parameters did it, promissory notes of theories to resolve it in the future, even though it doesn't look so promising. That did it. Inflation field, that did it. I'm just like, no. And then you have to account for the origin of, the matter and energy and it expanding. It's like, well, something did it. We don't know. Another promissory note. It's like, at what point do you say God did it? And I'm at that point. The other thing that's interesting is there are testable, in principle, testable predictions. So I did mention the Lawrence Krauss one. Okay, so this is a testable prediction, but it's outside our lifetime, unfortunately, way outside. In 5 billion years, the galaxies we see at high redshift should disappear. If 5 billion years from now in civilization we're still here and we see that it's not receded outside of the view, then that means space is probably static. That is one testable prediction that is testable in principle but not in practice, practicality, because it's outside of our lifetime. There are tests for some things in the creationist model, and there are things that Jesus had said. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will abide forever. Heaven and earth will pass away, my words will abide forever. And this is really powerful because the steady state advocates, the steady state viewpoint was the dominant viewpoint that the universe is eternal. The Christian faith and the Judeo-Christian faith was really some of the first religions that I know of that claimed that the universe had a beginning, and that particularly Christianity is saying it will pass away. We have testable predictions. The creationist model is saying the Earth's magnetic field will be gone in about 10,000 years. Now that's being generous because Wikipedia is suggesting it in 1600 years. And they're saying, oh, don't worry, we've shown that it's just a fluctuation in the past. And I'm saying, well, our actual measurements say it's decaying that fast. The circularly reasoned measurements of millions of years ago, that's an assumption. That's not. We've had direct measurements in the last 100 years or so with instruments to measure the strength of magnetic fields, and it's decaying. It's decayed 3.6% in my own lifetime. You extrapolate that, be it linear or exponential, it's going to be about gone in 1600 years. Russell Humphrey suggested 10,000. So there are testable predictions, and that's going to be very problematic for a number of origins theories. So, maybe the next generation after, if the Lord tarries, you get to see if these predictions start to come closer. I will say from the biological standpoint, I think James Tour has shown that life is miraculously arisen, even though he doesn't claim to be a creationist. And we do know that the human genome is deteriorating. As far as human civilization is concerned, heaven and earth are passing away for us effectively in that sense. So I think there's more data for the creationist model. I can't, I'm not claiming to resolve all the problems with Noah's flood and radiometric dating. But I think there could be some exciting things on the horizon. I really wanted to study photonics because of some of the things I said with the redshift. We can show that redshifts are caused by a variety of conditions. The more we understand photons, we'll be able to understand how redshifts can be induced in all sorts of ways. And maybe a few of these ways may be the ones that will explain why we see redshifted galaxies. And I think already we have promising indications, just like the experiments that were that I cited in this discussion. The last thing is, let me see if I have this article here. I wanted to show for time dilation, I had done this derivation where I start with Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics, and if you have an electromagnetic wave, you can demonstrate time dilation and some aspects of special relativity. But this may actually point to a few things as I was pondering it took me 8 weeks to put this together. Even though I was able to do it in 4 hours when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of pointers from my professor when he assigned the homework problem. But now I kind of did this from scratch, and then I added a few things to kind of clarify this derivation that shows the relationship of electromagnetic theory to special relativity. But as I was pondering this, I said, I think there could be evidence of variable speed of light in some experiments that could confirm that. And I'm eager to kind of get to the point where I could start doing research in photonics to build experiments. I talked about an interferometer I was building. I'm still eager to do that. Reginald Cahill in a university, at a good secular university in Australia, built that interferometer. I was just trying to duplicate his results. I would love to be able to duplicate it successfully, improve some of his ideas, that there is an ether, and if the ether can be shown to also be variable, then you have variable speed of light. And I'm not the only one that's proposed variable speed of light. Variable speed of light then would also resolve not only the paradox of distant starlight for the creation of the universe. When Jesus said, you'll see disturbances in the heavens, and Revelation talks about stars falling. But whatever passage you read, there is a suggestion that we'll be able to see disturbances. I mean, I read it anyway, that you can see disturbances in the sky from distant stars. Variable speed of light will solve that problem. A lot of young Earth cosmologies do not deal with end times. And I'm excited that we could start dealing with end times prophecies and seeing that science will affirm the words of the Lord, that we ought to at least have a mechanism to see disturbances in the heavens from very far away, that won't be constrained by the assumed non-variable speed of light. That prophecy to me suggests a temporal spatial variation in the speed of light. And that is kind of one of my long-term research interests, to pursue the study of the variable speed of light. So that's why I'd rather pursue that than the Big Bang at this point. I think the Big Bang's beyond rescue. I think other cosmologies are in play. And if you ask me for what my model is, I'd say, how about a ready-made universe? How about a ready-made universe? It has the microwave background built into it. You have stars in place. You have redshifts that are caused by either moving galaxies that were set in motion, or they're stationary, and there's another thing there's another cause for the redshift. Why wouldn't that model work, except that it just looks kind of miraculous? That model would work, because if the Big Bang and the steady state model are basically invoking miracles, but they don't want to say it, why can't creationists invoke the same? Why can't creationists invoke the same? And that's the thing that I try to hammer the evolutionists and the biogenesis researchers. You're saying that you don't need miracles, and you really do. You're just not willing to admit it. So with that, I'm gonna see if I can just close with my usual Rachmaninoff. So I'd really like to thank Rebekah for this, bringing to the forefront the discussion about the Big Bang. And I learned a lot from her, about the colliding galaxies. I didn't know about that. And she sent me some nice papers. So anyway, with that, God bless you all. A very happy New Year. Mr. Jetty, Paleologos, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, and of course, Bread of Life. Thank you, Schnoil. and there are a few others. Thank you for visiting and dropping in on my channel. Take care and Happy New Year and God bless you.